You're listening to the Tales of Leadership podcast. This podcast is for leaders at any phase on their leadership journey to become a more purposeful and accountable leader, what I like to call a pal. Join me on our journey together towards transformational leadership. Welcome back to Tales of Leadership podcast. I am your host, Josh McMillian, an active duty Army officer with over 16 years of leadership experience and the founder of McMillian Leadership Coaching. And I am on a mission to create better leaders, what I like to call a purposeful, accountable leader. And my vision is to positively affect 1 million lives in the next 10 years by sharing transformational stories and skills, both in the military and in the civilian workforce. And I'm going to do that by bringing on guests that I like to call transformational leaders. And today's guest is Tim Schurrer. Tim knows what it takes to build a winning team. He spent almost a decade of his career launching two highly successful brands, one Story Brand and the Business Made Simple as the COO alongside New York Times bestselling author Donald Miller. But before that, Tim worked at Tom's as well as Apple. Tim is also the author of The Secret Society of Success and a host of the Build a Winning Team podcast. He's also the CEO of David Novak's Leadership, whose mission is to make the world a better place by developing better leaders at every stage of life. As always, make sure you stay at the end, and I'm going to provide you what the top 3 takeaways are from Tim. Let's go ahead and bring him on Tales of Leadership. Welcome to Tales of Leadership podcast. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Tim. And before I kind of do that, I just want to say, hey, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day to sit down and talk about my passion, which is leadership.
Oh, man, I'm pumped to be here. This is great.
Yeah, brother. I think a great place to start would be kind of just defining who you are for our listeners.
Yeah. You know, for the longest time, I thought I was going to be the next John Mayer. That was my dream. I had some nice long hair. I had an acoustic guitar in my hand, and I thought that was it for me. So I moved to Nashville, chasing that dream. But what was interesting is the further I got down that journey, it just really wasn't working out for me. I found myself in these comparison traps where I'm always comparing, you know, the success that I was experiencing to people that I was going to school with, college with, at Belmont University. And it's like the more I got into that, the more unhappy I became because I just wasn't winning. And, you know, what I learned through that experience was, you know, sometimes when we hear and think about success, the definitions that we are being sold by culture is success is fame, money, power. It's get into the spotlight and you'll have everything you ever wanted. But I tried that. It didn't work. And so it kind of led me on this journey, a journey that I've been on for the last 15 years to say, okay, what is success actually? Because I'm doing a very different thing in my life today than I thought I would be when I had this big dream of being a musician. And yet the amount of fulfillment that I have in my life and career today is, you know, as high as it could be, but it didn't happen by accident. It actually was this journey that I went on.
That's beautiful. So what I would really love to to start with is that journey. You go to Nashville, you start chasing your dream, but then you learn that, hey, success doesn't equal significance, right? And you had to make a pivot in your life. What were some of those challenges as you started to discover your spark in life?
So when I first got married, so right after I was finished with college, I didn't graduate. I just finished. I stopped. Those are different things.
I got a criminal justice degree and I joined the Army, so that's probably equal.
So after my wife and I got married, we moved to Chicago and she was going to grad school. And I started working at Apple. And I just, the idea there was, all right, hey, go find a steady job for a couple of years. She then can be the one making the money and I can go back to chasing this music dream. But something really came alive for me when I was working at Apple. I mean, I love the culture. I love the products. Everything about Apple really fit my personality. And a new dream started to emerge, which was that I would run an Apple store by the time I was 30. That was a
Oh, wow.
dream that I had. But what was interesting in that is I started to kind of miss music, and I was still playing music on the side. I played at a couple restaurants, so I kind of still had a little bit of the itch. But after a trip to Nashville to spend time with some of my friends, I started wondering what it would look like to be a part of music without necessarily having to be the artist.
Mm.
And there was a friend of mine, a guy that I was really great friends with named Steve Mokler, who is a musician. And I started helping him with kind of some of the business side of what he was doing. How could I take stuff off of his plate running the day-to-day business that gave him more time to be creative? And there was something that came alive in me in that. So here I am working a, full-time job at Apple, but then on the side I start managing a musician. And Steve would release a record, and the same amount of fulfillment that I, would have had being the artist, I was getting being behind the scenes.
Oh,
So
wow.
here I was now slipping further and further into the background and actually finding so much joy and contentment and fulfillment in what I was doing, which if you would have told me that that was going to be the case as the guy who wanted to be in the spotlight and be the next John Mayer, I just wouldn't have told you that that was what the actual journey or the experience that I would be having would look like. But that's what I was navigating. So I started wondering, okay, is success then only having to be in the spotlight? Because that wasn't what I was experiencing. I was experiencing a version of success that was me being a little bit more behind the scenes. And, one of my favorite stories about this and somebody that I've really looked up to in this regard is a guy named Michael Collins. So a lot of people are familiar with Apollo 11. You've got
Yeah.
Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, but a lot of people don't know there's a third astronaut on that mission. And
Yeah.
it's this
I
guy,
don't-
Michael Collins. So Michael Ubers Neil and Buzz to the moon. Like he goes and drops them off on
I
the
love
moon.
that. He
So
Ubered them.
those guys can do all the things they got to do on the moon while he actually stays back in the command module and orbits the moon something like 26 times until those guys are ready to be picked up and brought back to Earth. But what happens when Michael gets back and sits down with the press, he doesn't act like a victim and talk about like, oh, it sure would have been nice to walk on the moon. He doesn't do that at all. He talks about how content he was to have had one of those 3 seats.
Mm.
So the question I think for us is, in your life, in your career, do you have to walk on the moon to be happy? Or can you find contentment being a part of the team? Can you find contentment with the seat that you have? Because in a world that just says to be significant, to make an impact, you have to be the one that people are talking about.
Yeah.
But think about all of the roles that are happening every single day that make the world turn that aren't getting that public recognition or that public attention. And so, I started to look at success differently. And so Michael Collins is a part of what I call the secret society of success.
Yeah.
This group of people that have shown me a new way to live and a new way to define success that's counter to what culture is selling.
That's such a beautiful concept too of redefining success, especially as a leader, because there's a misconception out there as the leader. So in the infantry, what I do in the army, there's a motto: follow me. Leading into battle, charging, being in front of your formation. But what I've learned throughout my time as growing up and maturing in the army, from a platoon leader all the way up to a company commander of now where I am as a field grade officer, leaders that do the best job, meaning that they get the best work out of their team and they produce the best leaders beyond them, are able to step back. And I love how you talk about, taking that spotlight that should be on you, but redirecting it to the people on the team that actually deserve it. And there's because I'm a weirdo, I love journaling about leadership. There's a rule that I like to call the rule of refraction. And I think as a leader, we have to be able to bend the spotlight from us, because we're not the ones that actually get the work done. We provide the vision, we provide the motivation, we provide the direction to get that done. But we have to be able to shine that light to people on our team, because if we can do that, I feel that that inspires them and builds influence. If you ever talk about John Maxwell, I don't know if you ever read any of his books, but how he talks about leadership as influence. I think of it in that concept, but for me, I think it's being able to inspire people. And I love how you took that concept of how can I redefine success, and then challenge, a common belief is that you're only famous if you're a major athlete or if you're standing up in front of the crowd. And there's a beautiful point, and I think it may be in your book too, talking kind of about like LeBron James, right? So LeBron James, one of the greatest basketball players ever, arguably the greatest basketball player ever, and in the prime of his career was always in the spotlight. But now he's shifting to a point of his career where he has to give more of his limelight, I guess, away to other team members on his team. And being able to do that with a servant heart, I think, defines great leaders now today, understanding when you need to step back and then let other team members jump in.
The thing about LeBron that is pretty amazing to me is in 2020, when he and the Lakers won the NBA Finals, LeBron, you would think a guy like that would want to be the scoring leader in the NBA. Him be the guy who's leading the league in points per game average. But in that particular year, LeBron wasn't even in the top 5, but he led the league in assists. So the way that he chose to play, and ultimately how he and his team won the championship, was by him setting other people up to score. So one of the big paradigm shifts in the book in this particular chapter is, what if success is in the assist? What if success actually looks like setting other people up to win? Which is very different from the message that most people are hearing. The message that most people hear is, go get you yours.
Yeah.
Do whatever it takes to be the scoring leader, and whatever that looks like in your line of work. But LeBron just paints a very different picture of what great leadership looks like and what it means to be in the secret society. It's setting others up to win.
So I want to kind of pivot over to what made you start this book and going through that journey. But before we do, I think that is beautiful. So one of the last company commands that I was in, it was Hawk Company. And it was one of the best jobs I've ever had. I had 250 soldiers underneath me, and the amount of responsibility I had was pretty great, but it was also just so beautiful to be able to affect lives every day and be able to be, a leader and a company commander within the Army. But our motto was a team of teams. And what I was trying to do was to instill a mindset within the organization, is that individuals can be successful. I can be a successful company commander, but we can fail as a team. If I win once and the team loses, then the organization loses and it'll continue to lose. But if I can win and my team members can win and my battalion wins, then we are creating what, like, Michael Scott likes to call a win-win-win, right? But that's the hardest concept to get around people, especially when they're kind of just starting out in leadership, is that it's the concept of you're sowing a seed, and that you have to let that seed mature. And then eventually that seed's going to grow into a tree, and that tree is going to bear fruit, not just for you, the leader, but for the organization and the individual. It's just going to be enough for everyone. And we are a team of teams. We're only successful if the higher organization does well and at the lowest level does well. It's not just about one person. And that's such a beautiful concept. But I would kind of love to hear what started you down this book journey. How did that start for you?
Well, it really just started as a dream. I went to an event that my friend Bob Goff hosted, and it was called Dream Big. And at the end of this 2 days, they went around the room and everyone said their big dream. And that there, for the very first time, I said out loud, I want to write a book. And having worked with Donald Miller for as long as I did, almost a decade, I got to see the impact that books can have on people's lives. And I loved getting to be a part of that from a behind the scenes role. But I just thought it would be a fun challenge to see if I could write a book. And so then, as you say that goal out loud, then it comes to, okay, well, what kind of book would you want to write? And where I really was finding passion and just hearing stories, your antenna's up all the time when you're in book writing mode, because you're just looking for little examples that you could, use and, talk about. And I just felt like a lot of people were experiencing this kind of idea, this tension about success that they were being sold and presented with. And yet no one was really talking about the fact that you can be winning behind the scenes, and that actually is a worthwhile endeavor. Like one of my best friends is a guy named Ben Malcolmson, and Ben worked for Coach Carroll, Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks. He worked with him for 13 years. And here Ben was behind the scenes working with Coach, loving his job, content in his role. But it's almost like everyone would come up to him and be like, so when are you going to, like do your thing, like jump out and, be a coach or, whatever. Right. So why is it that everybody has to jump? Why can't people just be content in the role that they have? Or, perfect example too is I'm working on this book. Well, there's all these editors that participate in taking the book from a raw manuscript that's turned into the one that ends up being published. And I think that a lot of people would look at an editor and say, okay, well, when are you going to be, the author? When's your name going to be on the front of the book? But what about that person who just says, I just like being an editor? Like, why this need to have to jump into more of the spotlight when I'm just content what I'm doing right now? So one of the things I was really passionate about is actually offering validation for all these roles that may be a little outside of the spotlight, but were extremely important and significant. And, just to communicate to that group of people, because I was in that seat. A lot of the work that I do is not going to get credit that, a lot of people would want, but I've just found that that's okay. And I actually am, operating in what I would have considered a dream job, even though I wasn't the person that everybody was talking about. And I just had to believe that there's a lot more people out there like me than people who, necessarily wanted to be a star. And then let me say really quickly, there is nothing wrong with somebody in the spotlight, right?
Yeah.
Like LeBron James could not be more in the spotlight. So being in the secret society actually has less to do with the amount of visibility you have in your role, your position on the org chart, and more about the posture in which you show up.
Yeah.
Because you can be in the secret society as someone in a supporting role. You can also be in the secret society as somebody who is in the spotlight. But what makes LeBron a part of the secret society is that approach to life and work that is helping others win, to serve, right? Giving to others, helping other people be successful. That's really what it looks like to be in the secret society. That's what it looks like to define success a little bit differently.
I love that. So I wrote down kind of like a quote. So understanding when it's time to step up and understanding when it's time to step back. And as I kind of work through, my leadership journey, I keep coming back to this term. I call it a PAL. So a purposeful, accountable leader. And what is a PAL? It's a transformational leader. It's a leader who chooses the hard rights over the easy wrong, a leader that gives credit in abundance. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is kind of going back to stories that I know that I can resonate with in the military. A great example of this is kind of like a firefight. So when I was in Afghanistan, when we're on normal missions, the squad leader, the team leader, the platoon sergeant, they're running the day to day, they're doing the normal routines. But when you get into contact, it's on you. It's on the platoon leader to step up and be the face of the organization. But those times that are so critical and pivotal happen far and few between. So you should not be at the front of your organization the entire time. You should be stepping back, because when you're stepping back, you can kind of see how the organization is working. You can find those inefficiencies, and you can, what the best example of that would be when I was doing brigade level live fires. My battalion commander, the first time I've ever done this, by the way. So there's 130 soldiers, and they crack an egg on an objective, and you're just running around like crazy, breaching and doing all these different doors, and you're doing echelons of fire with 120s, 155 artillery. And I was like, I have no idea where I should be. So as a leader of this organization, where should I be? And the brigade commander, I'll never forget, Colonel Sullivan, looked at me. He's like, Josh, you need to figure out where friction is happening. And then that's where you should be. That's where leaders should be, is friction. But you should do it from the back. And you only have to step up in certain moments of time. So I love that. And I resonate with it so much. And I would love maybe to kind of start going through the book and how you define success, and then what it means to be in the secret society.
Yeah. So, each chapter gives a paradigm shift for how you can look at success a little bit differently. And you've kind of
Yeah,
hinted at this concept a couple times. It's a big lesson that I learned through my time at Apple, and getting to see the leaders there show up in a particular way. So, when I first started at Apple, Steve Jobs was CEO. But
that's
then
incredible. I
he
love that.
actually, it's crazy. I mean, just the fact that I worked at Apple while he was the CEO is,
Yeah.
it's crazy. I mean, it really, I don't know what another
Yeah.
word to use. So he then passes away. The person who then took over is Tim Cook, who's the
Hmm.
CEO today still. So at the release of the Apple Watch, which was a pretty big deal for both Tim Cook and Apple, because this is the first product that had been released, first new product that had been released since Steve's passing. So they had released other iPhones and iPads and whatnot, but like new product, new category, huge moment. So after this big announcement, Tim's being interviewed on national television, and David Muir asks him, "Is this the moment for you? The moment of
Oh,
your
wow.
career at Apple?" Now, just think, if you're Tim Cook in that moment, how you would respond. Because here Tim had been in the background, in the shadow of Steve Jobs for
Mm.
years. He probably, you would think, would want to use this as an opportunity to kind of talk about why he's qualified for the job, how he's going to take the company into this next era,
Yeah.
right? Like, to make it about himself, take the spotlight. But Tim doesn't take the bait. And in fact, his response when asked, "So is this the moment for you, the moment of your career at Apple?" Tim says, "Well, it's a moment for Apple. I don't really think
Wow.
about myself that much." And his response reminds me a lot of a plaque that sat on Ronald Reagan's desk when he was president. And I actually have a replica of this same plaque right over my shoulder here. It says, "There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit."
Mm.
So, what if success is not needing the credit, right? So, we have these different stories throughout the book. We talk about LeBron James. What if success is in the assist? But this story with Tim Cook and Apple is helping us redefine success a little differently, and saying, what if success is not needing the credit?
Yeah. I would love to, if you could kind of walk through the spotlight mindset. And I
Mm-hmm.
wrote down this quote. So, an unhealthy desire for attention and recognition. And I absolutely love that. And it, to me today, you have to be a different type of leader than what was successful in the 80s, what was successful in the 90s, what was successful, in the early 2000s, or versus what's successful right now. And I feel that people more than ever kind of crave recognition in a way. Could you define what the spotlight mindset is and maybe some ways to avoid that, especially for people who are just starting out?
So, exactly like you had said, I define the spotlight mindset as this unhealthy desire for attention and recognition. So, the
Mm.
spotlight mindset is the thing that will keep us from being a part of the secret society. And, you might think, I don't, you know, I don't have an unhealthy desire for attention and recognition. But let me list out for you a few of the symptoms of the spotlight mindset. This is where you can really see this popping up in your life. So, you've got striving. Do you struggle to find contentment in your life? Does
Mm,
it lead you on a restless pursuit for more? Or how about comparison? Do you wish you were someone else or wonder how your success stacks up against others? Are you jealous in a way that gets in your way?
mm,
Or here's another one, damaged relationships. Does this pursuit for success, whatever version that looks like in your life, is this pursuit actually causing harm with the people that you care most about?
mm.
And there's a guy named Michael Hyatt that I've actually learned a lot from in this regard. And there's a story from Michael's early part of his career. And Michael was given the opportunity to run a division at a book publishing company. And at the time, this particular division was ranked 14th out of 14 on all the significant metrics:
Oh,
revenue,
wow.
revenue, team morale at the very
Yeah.
bottom. And so Michael actually tells the CEO, give me 3 years and I'm going to turn this thing around.
Wow.
Well, in only 18 months, Michael turned the business around, and he actually got a bonus check that he said was greater than his annual salary. And as you could imagine, he was so excited to get home. He was going to talk to his wife about it. He says his wife was his biggest fan. He knew she'd be pumped. But the conversation he had with his wife when he got home was very different from the one that he was expecting.
Oh, wow.
So he gets home, and the first thing his wife says to him is, we need to talk.
That's never
Married
good.
or not, that's not a good start, right?
Never good.
And, she goes on to say, your 5 daughters need you now more than ever before. And in fact,
Mm.
I feel like a single parent.
Oh, wow.
So here he was having all the success that he could imagine at work, and yet relationships with the people that mattered most to him were suffering because of it. So Michael, just to close the loop on that story, Michael a few years ago wrote a book called Win at Work and Succeed at Life. He calls it the double win. The
Oh,
way
wow.
that he defines success today is very different from that story. So whether it's comparison, striving, damaged relationships, there's others too, but the spotlight mindset, if we don't learn to identify it in our lives and then learn how to combat it, it actually can lead us down a pretty gnarly path, one that we never wanted to go down. And so
Mm.
why I want to help people look at success a little bit differently is, in different situations in your life, you're going to be challenged, probably even this afternoon. Are you going to choose to step in the direction of the secret society, or are you going to get caught in the spotlight mindset and let that kind of take you down, or,
Mm.
have you experiencing a less than ideal version of life?
I love that. So that story resonates with me pretty deeply because again, my stories are all based on the Army. But when I was a company commander, the amount of time that it takes as a leader in the Army versus a leader in a civilian, I think is different. It's for Tim, like, think about it this way: is if one of your employees gets a DUI, you may never know about it. But in the Army, I have to be the judge and the punisher. So I have to do the UCMJ against the soldier, and then actually punish the soldier, and then make sure that the family gets resources. So the amount of time that I was at work, and I'm not joking, I was at work from probably 5:30 in the morning to 1800 at night to be successful, to the level of success that I think that I should have been successful. And there was a moment, and I'll never forget this because it was kind of my wake up call, and that story just sparked that in my mind, that I came home and my wife was in the closet and she was just crying. And she basically said that exact same thing to me. Is like, I feel like a single parent, that I'm doing this all by myself. And I really reflected on where I was, because at that point, I got nominated for the General Douglas MacArthur Leadership Award. So in the Army, as a company command level, that's kind of like a Heisman. And that was such a huge, humbling opportunity. But what cost did it come at? The cost came at relationships. And I break relationships down between work, family, and self. But my family relationships, and it was so unbalanced that I had to really reflect on, okay, where I'm at in life, where am I going to be in 10 years, in 5 years? If I keep this type of grind up, I'll be successful. I'll be a lieutenant colonel. I may be promoted a year early. And that's the benefit, versus if I can do it and have balance, succeed at life and succeed at my job. And that's amazing. That story really resonated. So thanks for bringing that out of me.
So one of the things that I do, I'm the CEO of David Novak Leadership. So David's the former CEO of Yum Brands, so KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. And so after David retired from Yum, he really wanted to take everything that he knew about leadership and use it to help other leaders, to develop in that area. And so one of the big projects that we work on is our podcast called How Leaders Lead. And just on Veterans Day, we had Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney on the show. And he's a fighter pilot. And so Dan, he says, fighter jets take off into the wind. Why? Because we need resistance to ascend.
Oh, I love that, man.
Fly into the wind because you need resistance to ascend. And a lot of people, as they think about success, they look at people that are successful and think that they got there void of failure, void of challenges. But that's not at all how life works, and we all know it.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to learn to live in the way of the secret society, we have to have a more healthy view on failures and challenges.
Yes.
And a friend of mine here in Nashville is a guy named Scott Hamilton. So Scott won an Olympic gold medal in figure skating in 1984. Wow. And so Scott's, the crazy thing about him is he's had cancer and 3 brain tumors.
That isn't crazy. That's
and
crazy.
He talks about this as a blessing, because the way that Scott looks at challenges, he's like, Tim, what if failures and challenges, what if it's just information to help us learn and grow?
Yes.
So what if in your situation in your life, that was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to you, because it had you think about what really mattered most to you. And I think that that's what I've learned from successful people. It's they're wanting to fail fast, but they don't get down on themselves. They actually just look at failure and challenges as opportunities to learn. And so I've tried to adopt as much of that into my life as I can. We need resistance to ascend. Like, that's one of my favorite quotes ever.
Yeah, that is a beautiful quote. And it kind of, I guess, when the concept of failure, it reminds me of a quote that I wrote down from Winston Churchill. And it always comes back to me, is that success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And it took me a very long time, because failure is such a negative word. But failure is only labeled by us. Like Tim can only label failure in his eyes. I can only label failure in my eyes. And I think what people need to do to kind of overcome that is you have to define what failure is to you. So failure is not isolated. It's not avoidable. It's going to happen. And I think there's a quote by David Ramsey talks about, you look at all these famous people, and then like Tim, for example, where you're at in your life of where I want to be one day of writing a book, and you see how they're at the top of their summit, they're at the top of their mountain. But what you don't know is they're standing on all those failures that they incrementally improved upon until they got to the top of the summit, until they came the authority of where they are in life. And you have to be able to reframe your brain and change your perspective of how you define leadership or how you define failure. Because if you see it as, okay, I failed, there's no way I can recover from this, you're never going to take another opportunity, and you're never going to grow. 5 years will come by, you'll be 5 years older, and you'll be just as much as resentful and bitter because you haven't taken any action. I would love to kind of move it over to chapter 3, because I was looking through that, and there was a question that just stuck out with me, and it's so beautiful because it's kind of almost an affirmation in a way. And who am I here for? So asking that question, who am I here for? It gets to the heart of what I think the book is trying to reach, and that is chasing significance in life, not success. Chasing significance in life, and then asking such a powerful question, who am I here for? For me, I automatically go to, okay, who am I here for? I am here for soldiers. I want to make sure that I provide a positive role model of what good leadership looks like. I want to be here for my family. I want to make sure that my son and my daughter understand what it means to be a selfless leader and be a good role model for them so that they could carry the torch one day and pass it on. But that's such a beautiful question. And maybe you could kind of walk me without giving your book away, because I know we keep talking about your books. You got to tell me to shut up so we don't give your entire book away.
I'm fine. This is great. We can share as much as possible. And here's the reason why is, at the end of the day, if people buy a book, fantastic. But really, what I
Yeah,
really want to do is help people learn to think about success a little bit differently. So whether or not somebody buys a book, if they walk away from this conversation thinking a little differently, then we did exactly what we set out to do, right?
I love it.
Because who are we here for? We're here for the person listening to try to get some kind of benefit out of this to apply to their lives, so that they can learn to be better leaders, better, individuals. And that whole idea of who am I here for came from Andy Stanley. So I'm listening to Andy Stanley speak at this small arena in Atlanta, and a lot of people, as they're thinking about finding their purpose in their life, the question that a lot of people ask is, why am I here?
Yeah.
Why am I here on this earth? And Andy says that's the wrong question. And when I first heard him say that, I'm thinking, why is that the wrong question? That actually seems like a pretty great question. But he says
Yeah.
it's the wrong question because it's so focused on you.
Mm,
He said everyone wants to be the means to the end. No one wants to be the end. Like, another way to say it is, everyone wants to be in the one that people are talking about, right?
yeah.
And so what he says is, the question you need to ask is that other one. Who am I here for? And what I love about that second question is it requires you to bring your skills and your abilities and your passions, but it has you do that in a posture of helping someone else, thinking of someone else, which is exactly what the secret society is all about. And so I love this concept so much that when I went back to my office, I created an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Up at the top, in big bold letters, I wrote, "Who am I here for?" And under it, I put the pictures and the names of every single
Mm,
person on my team and their families. Because on the days when, I'm sure you've had these, your calendar, the colors are touching, right? There
yeah.
is
There's
no
no free
free
space.
space at
Yep.
all. Your inbox never stops. It's on those days I wanted to just beeline it to my desk and get my stuff done. Think about me.
Yeah.
But that's the exact moment when I really needed a reminder to have my antenna up for the people that I was there to serve. And, people think about in leadership, it's an opportunity for you to be served by more people. When
I
the
love
great
this. Yep.
leaders are there, seeing it as an opportunity to serve the most amount of people. And what I love is a perfect example of this. The Home Depot has what they call the inverted pyramid. So in most corporate org charts, you've got the CEO at the top of the pyramid, and then, at the bottom would be, your corporate workers and whatnot. But Home Depot inverts the pyramid, puts the CEO at the bottom in support of every single person in the organization, as to say, we are here to support you. And that's what I think great leadership is all about. So when you as a leader think about that, who am I here for? I think it puts you into a much better headspace to show up and, make an impact each and every day.
Team, I want to take a quick break from this episode and personally invite you to join our tribe. Are you looking for a community of leaders? If you are a leader at any level, join our Purposeful Accountable Leaders private Facebook or LinkedIn group. We would love to have you in the team. My mission is to create a community that allows leaders to ask questions, celebrate wins, and share lessons learned. All I ask is that you follow the B rule. Be respectful, be humble, be present, and add value to the community. You can find the link in the show notes to either join the Facebook or LinkedIn group, or simply just search Purposeful Accountable Leaders. Back to the podcast. So that's beautiful. The Army of, it's hard to break this paradigm of where I've been in the infantry and units. And I think General Milley at the time, when he came out with a policy, it was called unburdening company commanders, because there was all these different layers of bureaucracy that were placed upon us that took us away from our basic job. And our basic job was to train soldiers to go to combat and then do it effectively so they could come home safe. And you have to be able to change your perspective when you're in leadership. And that's such a beautiful concept, and I want to make sure that it sticks with people, is that you're not looking down of how they can help you. You're having them reach up to you, and you're serving them. And the best way that I like to think of it is like in staff. So where I was as a company commander, we had these staff sections, S1, which is like HR, S3, which is like operations, S4, which is like logistics. And a lot of those staff officers would always view, okay, you work for me. I need this data for this tasker, and you're going to do it. And I would always have to have a real conversation with them. Like, no, I'm a company commander. I need you to work for me. I need you to unburden me so I can do my base job. And you need to do these type of mundane taskers, because I can't afford to do it. Because if I'm always trying to feed the beast, then there's so much work that's just going to be lost. And another thing that you said that I want to make sure people understand is, when you wrote that board down, who am I here for? It was your coworkers and their families. Coworkers and their families. And there's a concept of leading the whole person. And it's such a beautiful thing, is when you're a leader, it's a privilege, not a right. And with that, you're accepting more responsibility of their families and their life. And you have to be able to accept the whole person. And there's a concept that I would see all the time. If I would have a really high performing team member, just an absolute rock star, and then all of a sudden they'd fall off. And they would fall off for like maybe 3 months, and then they would be back at the top. And I would see this pattern continuing. And what was happening is that their family life was struggling. They were newly married. They were running into financial issues. They would figure it out, and then they would go back into that. They would figure it out, and they would go back into that. But as a leader, you have to lead the whole person. And that includes family members. And that's such a beautiful thing. And I wanted to make sure that I stuck on that, because that's a beautiful nugget for people to get, especially from that chapter. The next chapter, if we could go there, probably for the last thing for the book, because I don't want to just keep talking about the book, is chapter 11, the concept of when is enough enough. And we kind of hinted to it, I think, before, of striving, of being in a hedonic treadmill, of always chasing that next job, chasing that extra, that more money. But from your perspective as a leader from your book, what was the biggest takeaway?
So, I learned this concept I was listening to a podcast one morning on my drive into work, and there's this pastor at a church in Minnesota talking about this concept of sheep bloating, which I had never heard of.
Sheep
But
loading.
apparently, sheep, if left to their own selves without any supervision, would eat so much that they actually can become bloated to the point of dying, actually.
Oh, wow.
So shepherds, realizing this, one of the things that they are to do is not only to take the sheep from grazing ground to grazing ground, it's actually to lie the sheep down to keep them from overeating. So the big question that I think this connects to us with is, with these sheep, you would think that maybe the thing that is causing sheep bloat is them eating unhealthy food or something, but that's not at all the case. It's actually green pasture all around them. And so for us as individuals, there is opportunity all over the place. So are we going to lie down, or are we going to be forced to lie down? Like, is it going to take a conversation with a spouse or someone that you really care about to say, I feel like a single parent, to help you realize that maybe the thing that you're chasing is causing more harm than good? Is it going to take, I had a friend who had a pretty intense medical situation because of the stress that was being caused from the job that she had. I've got so many people that I've heard of and have known that have had failures, moral failures. They're in addiction because they're chasing after a thing and it's causing all this stress. And these are the ways that they go and escape. And I just believe that great leaders can actually be void of these massive failures in that regard, right? Not the day-to-day failures on, chasing after something and not working out. I'm talking about looking at success and, wanting to be so successful to appeal to, our own egos versus really looking at this idea of like, can I be content in my life? Can I actually chase a version of success that's meaningful to me? Or am I just living and operating to have other people look at me a particular way? And so that whole concept of sheep bloating, I think hit home, because there's a lot of times in my life when I've just kind of always wanted that next thing.
Yeah.
And, chasing after more, you never can have enough. Turn the corner and you think you're on the straightaway, come to find out, it almost feels like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And so I really just believe that we can navigate our lives without having to have that massive crash. But I think that comes to looking at what we actually really want in our life. Why do we want the things that we want? Can we be content, or are we, going to always be, on this endless pursuit for more?
It took me a really long time to figure that out. And I started recently making decisions that was best for my family and what my passion was. So I call it the 3 Ps of perspective. I think that we have to be able to look into the future, but also look into the future with a clear sight picture of where we want to go, but connect our passion with our purpose. Because if we can connect our passion with our purpose, then we can create head and heart alignment, and then our hands are just going to naturally do it. But it took me such a long time, because I call the concept, if you ever read the book Vivid Vision, of just a bald tire with no traction, just tire just spinning in the mud, because I was just doing things. Like I was doing things within the family space because I thought it was going to bring me fulfillment there, going on these fancy vacations, you spending all this money, because I thought that was the definition of fun. And then I really sat down, and what I come up with is call it cast a vision of what pillars are the most important in my life. And then for me, faith, family, fitness, field, fun, and fulfillment. Those are the 7 areas that I'm trying to gauge success long term in my life. And then creating goals for those, but not goals that I'm trying to just knock down. Because if I just knock down goals, then I'm creating that same dopamine response of where I'm chasing the next goal and I'm chasing the next goal and I'm chasing the next goal and I'm never content. But it's focused on growth. And I do it at 10 years out. So I set goals in each one of those bins that are truly important to me with the intent in 10 years. So in 2031, who will Josh be at the end of that? And I create use cases. And I don't know if you ever heard those or not, but use cases used in systems engineering to define how systems work with each other. And I'll create this very vivid use case of how my life will work in harmony when it comes to family in 10 years, where we'll be. And then I sit down with my wife, and this was one of the most important things that I learned is sharing it. So we all heard the acronym SMARTS, like specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-based. Well, I like to call it SMARTS. You share it. So share it with my wife. And I learned that back at that story of my wife in the closet. And once I started creating a vision, then now everything seems like it has a purpose in life. Now it seems that I'm working and I'm getting traction. I'm not just a bald tire in the mud. I'm creating friction. And that going back to that Air Force pilot, I can't even think it, fly into the wind because we need the resistance to ascend.
That's right.
I love that, man. That's like just sticky. It just sticks with you. But we need resistance to gain momentum. But once we gain momentum in life, you can run over obstacles. And there's a term in the military for an obstacle. It either blocks, turn, fixes, or disrupts us in life. And if we're going from obstacle to obstacle, once we encounter that, we're going to stop. But if we have momentum, we may be able to blow right through that thing. And once I started doing that, I was able to create momentum in my life. And when I was looking through that chapter, that's what really resonated with me. And that's the beauty about reading, is that your ideas spur such a deep thought process within me and then whoever reads it. And that book is absolutely amazing. But I would love to hear, because you worked with some pretty influential people. So Steve Jobs, Donald Miller, both of them, I read their autobiography for Steve Jobs, and then the Story Brand, I read through that. And that was influential in me being able to build my coaching business that I see now, because that was so stressful for me. Because the way I see it is that this is my digital reputation. Everything that I'm putting out there within my company, within my business, within social media is my digital reputation. And as a leader, that is one thing that I feel that we must protect ruthlessly, is our reputation, because it takes a lifetime to build, but you can lose it in just a second. So working with such influential leaders, what was the biggest takeaway that you had in terms of leadership?
One of my favorite days at Story Brand was a day right around the release of Don's book, Scary Close. And so about 10 days after a book comes out is when you find out if it hits the various bestseller lists. And it's a pretty big deal as an author to, hit the New York Times list or Wall Street Journal. So, Don gets a phone call when he was in the office from the publisher right about that 10-day mark. And so we knew this is probably the phone call that we'd find out. So he hangs up the phone, lifts his hands in the air and says, "We hit number 5 on the New York Times." And so we high five and we hug and, and we celebrate. But then something pretty beautiful happens a couple minutes later, and we all walked back to our offices and went back to work.
Yeah.
And, some might hear me tell that story and, say, "Tim, y'all don't know how to celebrate wins. Like, what's wrong with you?" But, the way that I look at it is very different. I actually saw it as a pretty beautiful display of a group of people, a culture in a company that had been created where it was more about falling in love with the work than the results of that work. Accolades are fine. Sometimes they're very validating, but I was going to show up the exact same way that afternoon and the next day, whether or not we hit that list. And there's a quote that I heard, from Steve Jobs where he says, "The joy is in the journey." And I think that's it. Fall in love with the work. I was just preparing for a interview we're going to have on how leaders lead with Uri Levine. He's one of the co-founders of Waze. And he wrote this book, Fall in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. But it's that same kind of idea. It's like, what if you can actually just fall in love with the work? And, a lot of times that looks like solving problems over and over, thinking of other people and kind of keeping that the focus. If there's a quote, a North Star for me, it's this one by Albert Schweitzer as I was writing my book, and, even a North Star that still guides me today. And it's this. He says, "I don't know what your destiny will be. Some of you will perhaps occupy remarkable positions. Perhaps some of you will become famous by your pens or as artists. But I know one thing. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." So as I think about what does it look like to be a part of the secret society, how do we show up as leaders? It's that, help others win. I think if you do that, the rest is going to take care of itself.
Love that. And that was an impactful quote, and I'm going to find it. That's a beautiful quote. And one thing that you said there, and I want to make sure that it resonates with the listeners because it's so easy to do, is celebrate the wins, celebrate the small wins, celebrate with your team. Because if you don't celebrate, that next tasker is going to come, that next major milestone that has to happen as a team is going to come. And I can give you countless examples within the job that I'm in right now of on a daily basis of where we have a win and then how the next thing comes almost immediately after that. But the concept of falling in love with the work, for me, it's all about the identity, like at the core of, and it's an onion, right? So the identity, the process, and the outcome. Who are we as an organization? And to become that person, provide that service, whatever it is, what are the processes and the systems that we need? And then the results will just naturally come. But if we're focused inward out, that'll happen. As an organization, we will do it, we will grow. But if we're focused outside in and we're not centered with who we are, it'll never happen because we're focused on those KPIs, key performance indicators, and we're always watching the numbers instead of watching our people. And I love that. All right. So last question before we get to our final show segment is, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some goals that you want to have?
So I'm just stepped into this CEO role with David Novak leadership in August. So I'm passionate about a lot of the same things that David's passionate about. And, I feel like there's a lack of great leadership. And in fact, there's so many people who have worked for a really bad boss. And it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. But the trauma that a bad boss can cause can impact people more than we'd like to realize. And so, I feel like one of the things I'm passionate about is really declaring war on bad bosses. And that's one of the big things that we're going to be focusing on this year is, we have a whole campaign that we're launching around that idea. So everything that we do in leadership, curriculum and training and whatnot is targeted and aimed to help people, fight this war against bad bosses. So
I love that.
if
You're speaking my language.
If you'd love this because you love leadership so much, if you go to howleaderslead.com, we actually have a new online course there that you can access for free to have you start thinking about leadership a little bit differently and use some of the same ideas and concepts that David used to grow Yum from $4 billion to $32 billion.
That's crazy.
And, you can apply these same things running a small business, large business, it doesn't matter. But it's very much in line with kind of this help others win idea, a servant-based leadership kind of philosophy. And so I think there's so much opportunity on all that we're doing with David Novak that I just am really excited about. And I wrote down the you and I are talking on January 3rd, so brand new year. I'm 36 right now. I wrote down I want to write another book by the time I'm 40. So I don't know if I'll release it by the time I'm 40, but I want to write another one. So starting to ideate around what that could look like. What is it that I'm passionate about? The world doesn't need another uninspired book. So, what's
Yes.
the thing that I am seeing out in the world that I feel like I can provide some, answers for, or some alternate thinking around. And I'm really happy with this one. The Secret Society has been so fun, and I want to do it again. So, and just continue to build relationships with my family. We've got a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and so I spend a lot of time with my wife and kids, and just want to keep that as a focus. And just want to keep staying healthy too. I mean, you talk about fitness as an important thing for you too. I want to be alive as long as possible to help as many people as possible. And you can only do that if you take care of yourself. So focusing a lot on that kind of stuff too.
I love that. So discover your purpose, cast a vision, and take inspired action. So you and I share a goal. It's funny because we're the same age too. We're both 36. But when I get out of the Army, whenever that day comes, that's when I want to start working on a book. And that's part of my vision. Because I mentally just can't see me doing it with the amount of work and what I already have kind of taken on with this. But I love that concept of declaring war on bad bosses, because to me it speaks to my soul as an infantryman. Because what do we do? My definition is, I like to tell everyone, I'm James Bond, right? Is that we seek with and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. That is the basic definition. If you're going out on resume job hunting, we're looking for someone to seek with and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. Only crazy people would sign up for that job. But I absolutely love that. And I will tell you, because I've seen it, bad bosses kill. One of the reasons that I've started this is the amount of suicide that I've seen in the military. And a lot of that is people getting out and losing fulfillment in their life, a sense of camaraderie, that purpose, that burning desire that they had. But they got out just because of one poor leader, just one bad leader. And I can count on both of my hands the number of great leaders that I've had. But I can tell you some stories from one or two that I've had in my entire career that just stick with me, because they're just so sticky, and how they've affected tens of people's lives and continue to affect my entire platoon's lives to now. And that mission that you have is one that the world needs. The world needs light. The world needs a leader that can shine a spotlight in a dark room, because that's what leaders are. They're a shepherd. You have to be able to provide that purpose and direction and that vision and take inspired action. So that is beautiful, Tim. I always say that I love my last podcast. That was my favorite podcast. Well, now I'm changing that. This is my new favorite podcast.
Well, man, thanks so much. I love talking about this stuff. And, the hope really is that people take something and apply it. You only, David just wrote this brand new book. He sent me a new manuscript. It's around this idea of active learning. So, there's a difference between avid learning and active learning. Avid learning is you're a learner. Active is you take something and apply it. So, may we be active learners. Take things that we're inspired by, hearing, and actually applying it to go do something. And so I hope people walk away with some new way of thinking about something, some inspiration to show up a little bit differently in their life, and then they actually do it.
Tim, that's amazing. It's time for our final show segment that I like to call the Killer Bees. These are the same 4 questions that I ask every guest on the Tales of Leadership podcast. Be brief, be brilliant, be present, and be gone. Question 1. What do you believe separates an average leader from an extraordinary leader?
Extraordinary leaders help others win.
I love it. So question 2, what's one resource that you can recommend to our listeners that's helped you?
Soundtracks by John Acuff is a fantastic book. I, he goes about tackling this idea of overthinking and how can we actually get into better headspaces by telling ourselves more helpful stories and soundtracks, which are very often broken.
I love that. So question 3, if you had the opportunity to give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be and why?
I think I would have needed to hear it's okay to step into a different kind of a role. It's fine to have the goal. If you want to go be a musician and chase that thing, that's fine. But check your intentions behind why you're trying to do anything. And if it's for the accolade, if it's for the credit, if it's for people to look at you as successful, that's not going to be nearly as fulfilling as if you're doing all of that, stepping into that thing, into that role to make an impact on other people's lives. The second one's going to be a lot more fulfilling.
Wow. The final question. So how can our listeners find you, and then how can they add value to your mission?
Yeah. So, the best thing that you could do is engage in this conversation around how success can be redefined. And so, the book is The Secret Society of Success. It's available on Audible, Amazon. I actually did the narration for the audiobook, which is a lot of fun. So I'll read it to you.
You have a way better
really
voice than me. My Appalachian accent would come out and just ruin the whole thing.
Nah, you'd be great. You'd be great. You're definitely you should narrate your own book. It's a lot of fun. So that's a way that people can dig even deeper into some of what you and I have talked about. But really, it's just to think a little bit differently about that for yourself. I mean, I think that adds a lot of value to me because I believe in this so much, and I see the importance in more people navigating these things in their own lives.
Tim, I love it. Thank you so much for being intentional with me over the past hour. And if there's anything that I can ever do, to add value to you, don't hesitate to reach out, because you've added so much value to me and all my listeners.
Oh man, this has been so fun. I really appreciate you having me. It's great.
All right, team, it's time for our after action review. That was our episode with Tim. What were the top 3 takeaways you should have? So first and foremost, one of the big takeaways, I'm not going to count it in my top 3. Make sure you go read his book, The Secret Society of Success, because it is exactly what I'm trying to do in the military, of redefining what success means. Do we have to step on people? Do we have to view people as stepping stones to get to that next position? Are we trying to chase titles? Are we trying to be in the spotlight? And will that bring us happiness and fulfillment in life? And my answer to that question is no. Only thing it will do is create a dopamine spike and make us chase that feeling again and again and again. And all we're going to do is erode our reputation and ruin relationships along the way. There is a better way to be a leader. And Tim beautifully lays that out in The Secret Society of Success. I like to call it a PAL, a purposeful, accountable leader. But he uses a lot of the individual stories in the civilian perspective, which is fascinating to me because I've spent my entire professional career in the military. So the first key takeaway that you should have from Tim is success is in the assist. And he shared a story in the book and on this episode of Tim Cook, where he just took over Apple after Steve Jobs passed away, and they're getting ready to launch the Apple Watch. And one of the reporters asked, is this going to be the moment that you step into the spotlight, you become the next Steve Jobs and usher Apple into the next era? He's like, this is a moment for Apple. I don't think about myself that much. And as a leader, we have to be okay with not being in the spotlight often. So part of the rules that I'm going through on my journey, and I've established, I think, 27 rules now, but one of them is the rule of refraction. As a leader, we must be able to bend the light on others within our team because it does several things. But the most important thing that it does is it gives recognition where recognition is due. If you're the leader who always takes credit and stands up when someone else has done the work, it's going to pay in the long run, and it's going to pay with a loss of relationship. And there's a quote that Tim brought up that's just beautiful, and I'm going to say it again. Fly into the wind because we need resistance to ascend. Be there and be able to assist your team. So the second key takeaway, asking the powerful question, who am I here for? Not what am I here for? Change your perspective. As a leader, you have title, you have position, you have authority, you have perks of the job. But if you are only doing it because of the perks of the job, you are not a leader. You're just someone just in that position temporarily. What we have to do, the first thing as a leader, is being able to see through us, look into the future, and understand that the position is a legacy, and how we leave it is either going to be a positive mark in the organization and within that role, or a negative mark. And when you ask the question, who am I here for? It helps you recenter that versus what am I here for? So, regardless of where you are on your leadership journey, ask that question, who am I here for? And I shared, and Tim shared with me on the episode, who we're here for. I'm here for soldiers. I'm here to make sure that they have better leaders, leaders that I would allow my son and daughter to be led by. That's who I'm here for. I'm here for my son and my daughter and the next generation of leaders. And I want to make sure that they are going to be the best possible leader that they can be, because I'm going to entrust my son and daughter potentially one day to them. So the final key takeaway is active learning. And I didn't want to get into it too much on the episode, but I'll share it with you in the after action review. This is something that's taken me a long time to understand. So I first wanted to read as many books as possible. And there was a time where I was reading 2 to 3 books a month. But was I retaining any of the information? And the answer is no. Active learning means that we'll use a book, for example. And I just finished a book, Failing Forward by John Maxwell. I took that book and then I turned it into blogs that I'm passionate about for leadership, but I'm also trying to live and use those principles through my lens. And when we're doing that, when we're actively learning, it becomes a lifelong experience. And you're not just focused on reading the amount of books. So I'll share with you, and this will be a later episode that I walk you through these. But when I finished that book, I learned what failure was not, defining what failure was not. I learned that failure is not avoidable. It's going to happen. And this all follows the acronym of failing. So assuming it's isolated. Failure is not isolated. It's going to happen in many different places. Incorrectly labeling failure. L, limiting your perspective. I, it's immovable. Failure is not immovable. N, naive to failure. And then G, gone forever. Once something happens, we can never have it back. And I learned through that book, being intentional, how to not define failure. And that helps train my brain as I begin to chase hard things, especially what I'm doing right now, creating a coaching company, hopefully one day writing a book. And you have to be able to retrain your brain because you're going to encounter obstacles in life. And if you haven't encountered an obstacle yet, trust me, your day is coming. You're going to encounter an obstacle. And the final thing I want to share with you is the quote that he brought back up by Albert Schweitzer. I do not know what your destiny will be. Some of you will perhaps occupy remarkable positions. Perhaps some of you will become famous by your pens or as artists. But I know one thing, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve, Hey, if you've gotten any value from today's episode or any of my previous episodes, do me a favor, leave a comment, leave a review, but most importantly, share this podcast with someone who is a leader. I don't care about position. I don't care about title. I don't care how long they've been in their seat. Share this with someone who is a leader, someone that can benefit from the wisdom that Tim shared. I'm your host, Josh McMillian, saying every day is a gift. Don't waste yours. I'll see you next time.